On this episode of Mitch and Mark at the Movies, we're going to review the film Anora. It's an award-nominated film that we think you're going to enjoy, and we go in depth on the review. We're also going to cover the nominees for the Directors Guild of America's Best Director Award for this year. And then finally, we're going to recommend, if you stay to the end, some shows that we're watching on streaming services that we think you're going to enjoy. Stay tuned. Hello, everybody. Welcome to Mitch and Mark at the Movies. My name is Mark Fisher, and I'm here with my friend and co-host, Mitch Brisker. How you doing, Mitch?
Hey, I'm doing great, Mark. Good to see you again.
Yeah. We've got another fun show here for everybody tonight. Basically, we're going through movies that are up for nominations in various different Directors Guild and Oscars. The Oscar nominations, in fact, are coming out this weekend, and we'll be going over those on a future show. But we wanted to cover, we're going to do review the film Anora, which a lot of people may not have seen yet, but we're going to go into detail on that. And then we're going to go down the list of Directors Guild of America nominees for this year that just came out as well. And right. I want to ask you a little bit about the Directors Guild and get a little background on that too, and then we'll go from there.
Thanks, Mark. Before we continue on, I want to acknowledge the passing of David Lynch. We lost a really great filmmaker and a great artist and really an American treasure. He was a huge influence to a lot of us. He kind of came out, in my era when I was in film school, and his films were so amazing, and he was just such an incredible artist, and I just would like to mark his passing. I was really shocked that he died this week. It's like, David Lynch was I don't know, but he was really a pure avant-garde filmmaker. For a lot of us who were really delving into experimental filmmaking in college and trying all kinds of different things. Like David Lynch was just like a god in that area because he sort of brought this kind of very painterly. He was also a painter and a sculptor. I don't know if anybody ever read his cartoon. He drew a cartoon series for years, a cartoon strip. They used to show it in LA Weekly called "The World's Angriest Dog," and it was really interesting. So that's just another part of our great living film organism that we've lost. I'll put a link in the show notes, but if you've never seen the iPhone ad that David Lynch did, you must watch it now. So it's on YouTube. You can Google David Lynch iPhone ad, or I'll put a link in the show notes if I remember, which sometimes I forget. But anyway, that's as you said, rest in peace, David Lynch.
Okay, well, we'll carry on here. So the movie that we're reviewing tonight is Anora, and this is a film by Sean Baker. And he on the poster there, it says A Love Story by Sean Baker. And I knew nothing about this movie when you told me that we should do this. And so I rented it because it's not in the theaters and it's not on streaming services yet. So I rented it on demand, not knowing anything about it other than when I saw this first picture, I thought, oh, it's a romantic comedy or something. And that's all I knew about it. But then when I got into watching it, at about 20 minutes into it, I actually called you and said, oh my God, I can't believe what this movie's about. It's like really, really different, and a long discussion about it. But basically, Anora, without giving too much away, it's basically an encounter between this woman, her name's Anora, and she goes by Annie in the film. And she's an exotic dancer, stripper, whatever you want to call her, and a sex worker in Brooklyn, New York. And she's a young girl. And then because she speaks Russian and understands it a little, she understands it more than she speaks it. They hook her up with this Russian client who comes in, or customer who comes in, and he's a young guy. He looks all of 21. and that's where the story begins, and it carries on from there. And it's yeah, I was telling you before we went on the air, this is the first movie I've seen in a long time that after I was done with it, I went, I want to watch that again. I mean, it's that good in my opinion.
Yeah.
And it stars this actress. I had not seen her before, so to me she was a relative unknown, Mikey Madison. And for those who don't know, she started as a teenager in a Fox television, an FX television series called Being There, I think it's called, for 5 years as a teenager. And then the most recent roles that she did, she was in Quentin Tarantino's Once Upon a Time in Hollywood, and she played Susan Atkins, one of the Manson girls. And then she was in the latest version of Scream, and that's her film list of films that she did. Well, anyway, before I knew who she was, I was watching her in the strip club, and I'm thinking, boy, what'd they do? Did they hire an actual stripper and then teach her to act? Because she knew every move and she knew what she was doing in that strip club, and I was really amazed. And not only that, it takes place in Brooklyn, and I found out after the film, after I did a deep dive into her. She's from Southern California. She's from Los Angeles. She doesn't even. She took on a Brooklyn accent and studied to do that and tried to get it authentic. She didn't speak Russian. She had to learn how to speak Russian for the movie because she does have to speak some lines in Russian. And then she also went to boot camp, a stripper boot camp with an experienced stripper to learn how to dance and learn how to interact with customers and all that. And in my opinion, this is a very brave performance for her. And I think it's an award-winning performance in my opinion.
For sure.
I'm sure you're going to have other opinions, but I can't imagine any other actress, like that are up for Oscars all the time. Nicole Kidman in her youth, or Demi Moore in her youth. Demi Moore tried to do striptease back in the years ago, and it was like, okay, there's Demi Moore as a stripper, right? This girl's performance was phenomenal and really well done, and I just think it makes the movie. The other person that's in the film is this Russian actor. His name's Mark. I'll let you pronounce the last name. I couldn't do it.
I think it's Idushian.
Okay, and he plays.
But my Russian friends forgive me for the pronunciation.
Yeah, he plays Ivan, who's basically the male love interest, and he's the son of a Russian multi-millionaire oligarch, and he's in the club and having a good time. But he looks all of 21. I mean, literally, they couldn't have cast a better guy from appearance-wise, in my opinion, because I see a lot of movies these days where they say, oh, this person's 16 years old. And you go, come on, they look like they're 25, 26, 28. This guy looked 21 years old in his physical appearance and everything else. But he was great in the movie as well. And anyway, I just thought, the story is very interesting. They filmed it on location in Brooklyn, and then I filmed some of it here in Las Vegas. And Sean Baker, I found out, they did it kind of a little bit guerrilla style, because they went into some of these restaurants and things in Brooklyn where they filmed some of the scenes, and the crowd that were in there, they didn't even know that it was for a movie. So anyway, I found it very interesting. Anyway, that's my take on it so far. How about you, Mitch?
Well, yeah, I mean, Sean Baker referred to this film. I mean, look, if you look at the poster, put that poster up again.
Okay.
If you kind of I'm familiar with his work and so forth, but you look at the poster. I'm sorry.
Here's Sean Baker. Just
no. The poster for the film.
Yeah. No, I know, but I'm just saying this is Sean Baker. He's the writer and director for the movie.
Right.
There you go.
But if you look at that poster and you know Sean Baker's work, and you know that Neon is like an indie releasing company, the film sort of reeks that the term love story is a little bit ironic. So at least I went into it assuming that there was going to be a bit of irony, more than, I mean, this film is significant in ways that we could talk about in multiple chapters here. But it's, Sean Baker described the film as it's a fairy tale until it isn't. And, it's like a Cinderella story, except imagine that, Cinderella is a 23-year-old stripper sex worker, and Prince Charming is a 21-year-old son of a billionaire Russian oligarch. So, and it's very interesting circumstances, but it's kind of that's the milieu of the film, but the real heart of the film explores some themes about the shaming of sex workers, but mostly about power differential. This film is really about how power is associated with money and about how there's this differential that's used to sort of segment and abuse people. And so, yeah, it's pretty amazing. And it was shot, it was shot on location in Brooklyn and Vegas, but also a lot of it took place in Coney Island and
Right.
a neighborhood
Brighton
next to Coney
Beach.
Island.
Brighton
Yeah,
Beach.
exactly. Brighton Beach, which is primarily Jewish and primarily Russian Jewish. So yeah. Anyway, it was I love this film. I can't say enough about it. I think Sean Baker deserves the DGA award. I think he deserves an Oscar. I think the film deserves multiple awards. But I have to tell you, there's one thing. Oh yeah, and Mikey Madison, she was also in the Addams Family. You forgot to mention that. People might have seen her in that. But as soon as I started watching this film, it's so obviously a Cinderella film, and there's this wonderful opening scene in the strip club, which they shot in a strip club, which they the director credits his his location manager with finding the strip club, which is that's kind of where Mikey Madison went to boot camp. But she went in there and she learned like how you work a guy to get money, and and there's this amazing scene in the film. Sean Baker said he shot about 3 rolls of film. They shot this film on film, and that would be about a half hour, depending on the size of the loads. But so he shot about a half hour of film with a telephoto lens, completely off the cuff, with Mikey Madison actually being in character, going around and interacting with the extras and meeting people for the first time and giving lap dances and kind of, figuring out how to hustle them into the back room so she could give them a lap dance and make some money. And it's just an extraordinary scene.
It is.
I know you had mentioned, oh my God, it seems so real. And they really harnessed some unique techniques and energy to pull it off. And there's also Sean Baker also credited his production location manager. And for those of you who don't know, a location manager is a person. They're like they're the person who's responsible for finding locations, securing locations, and then going into those locations. And ahead of time, like if Steven Spielberg's coming to your little village to make a film, the location manager is going to show up and make sure that everybody is included and everybody knows everything. And so this location manager on this film did a great job, because the locations on this film they're like character in the film, which is something that Sean Baker does. He did it in the Florida story. These locations that he shoots in, they're really intrinsic to the story. And they also, I heard an interview with him where somebody asked him about the mansion where the oligarch lives, where a lot of the film takes place.
Right.
And he said, that he literally Googled, what's the biggest mansion in Brighton Beach or in Coney Island, and he found this place, and it was up for sale, and they were able to secure it. And that mansion is literally a character in this film. But
absolutely, yeah.
And there is, I have to say, the scene in the strip club is amazing, but there's also it's over 20 minutes. There's a home invasion scene, which is absolutely spectacular. It's funny, it's violent, it's tense, it's dramatic. It's like everything you could possibly imagine, and it goes on forever. And later, when I read that scene was over 20 minutes, I'm like, if you asked me, I would have said it was 3 minutes, because it literally went by so quickly. I mean, so when I started watching this film, a few minutes into it, I started relating it to my thoughts about Disney princess films, because in a way, this is kind of the anti-Disney princess film, because, we make these films, Disney makes these films that are based on fairy tales that are originally intended to indoctrinate girls into how they're supposed to behave in the patriarchy, like how they're supposed to accept these false senses of beauty and how unless they're the beautiful one, they're not going to find love, and how I think the most egregious one is the Little Mermaid. And I really became aware of this listening to a podcast by Malcolm Gladwell, the author and speaker. He's got a podcast called Revisionist History, and he did a 2-part series on the Little Mermaid. And if you look at that film, it's very indicative of the toxicity of the Disney princess genre, that whole franchise. The Little Mermaid, Ariel, she's told that if she gives up her voice, she has a chance at Prince Charming. Like, how long have we been telling little girls to shut up so that they can get the right guy, right? And then on top of that, she has to give up her fin and get legs. So there's like this subtle sort of body shaming in the Little Mermaid. Like I said, I'll put a link to this podcast. It's really interesting. So I was kind of watching this film, and I don't think this was anything that the director intended, but maybe he did. I don't know. But I was watching it through the lens of a cultural lens that's already spawned all these Disney prints. So the kind of the paradigm of a Cinderella story or a princess story, it's just already out there. And this film so brilliantly deconstructs that, and it so contains the kind of message that unfortunately little girls can't see this film because of the nudity and the violence and so forth. But at least going out into the culture, this very much takes all of that apart. So I thought that was, Malcolm Gladwell, and I agree with him, psychologically, he described the Little Mermaid, the film, as a cinematic dumpster fire, right? So that's, for me, one of the reasons why this film was so refreshing, because it was like completely contrary to the whole Cinderella story and the whole, the whole Disney princess story. So anyway, maybe I'm being a little too cultural, or
no, I agree with what you're saying. I agree.
There is because a lot of these stories, like take Little Red Riding Hood. This is all about teaching women, teaching little girls that men are evil and they only want one thing, right? Because you look delicious and I'm going to eat you up and all that stuff. It's just a metaphor for I'm going to have my way with you. Neil Jordan, the British director who did Mona Lisa he did what was it? He did The Crying Game. He did Interview with the Vampire. He did Greta, and he did I can't think of the other film that I love that he did. He did a film back in probably the early 90s. He did a film called In the Company of Wolves. And it's kind of a fever dream adult version. I don't mean adult like sexual, like explicit, but just it's a very mature story. It's not a fairy tale. But he did a version of the Little Red Riding Hood story that is just absolutely amazing. It's critically acclaimed film, and if anybody's interested in seeing how one of these stories gets deconstructed in a really interesting way, I'll put a link again. I highly recommend watching In the Company of Wolves. Not a very well-known film, but a very well-made film.
I was going to say, when I first started watching the first 20, 30 minutes, I told you, I called you and I told you, I said, oh, this is kind of like Pretty Women with TNA. You know what I mean? And
yeah.
Much more deep than that. And I hadn't gotten far enough into it. And now I get your points completely. But I do want to let viewers know that there is a lot of nudity in it and sex in it. And so if that offends you in any way, you may not like this movie, but I highly recommend seeing this movie. I think it's entertaining. Like I said, I want to watch it again as soon as it gets on a streaming service or something, so I don't have to pay money for another ticket to see it. But I'm definitely looking forward to seeing it again. And then the other thing I was going to mention too is that this film by Sean Baker, right? It won. Sorry about that. Let me switch this over here. Where is it? There we go. It won the Palme d'Or award winner at the Cannes Film Festival where it debuted, and I highly recommend it for people to watch. There's things that I can't tell you about that happen in the movie because it will spoil it for you, but I definitely enjoyed it. I'm glad that you mentioned it to me, Mitch, and that we should review it.
Oh yeah, no, it's one of my favorite films of the year. I'm glad you mentioned Pretty Woman, because I was not just thinking about the Disney princess films when I was watching this film. I was also thinking about Pretty Woman after the film was over. I was thinking about it that for one thing, Pretty Woman is an extremely iconic, successful film, and it's also just an incredibly dishonest film. Uh, so, and let me just break that down, because this is kind of like a Pretty Woman type story. Except if you remember Pretty Woman, I'm trying to think the story. Somehow the Julia Roberts character was in peril and she needed money, so she decided to sell her body to exchange sex, engage in transactional sex with a man, Richard Gere, but she never does engage in that. Not the literal transactional sex. I mean, he does buy her out. I mean, she's really heavily rewarded, but it's all redeemed because he's like Prince Charming. He's this Prince Charming myth, which is this myth which literally psychologically destroys any chance that little girls are going to have of ever finding love unless they are able to overcome it, or they find somebody that fits their paradigm of.
Well, and the final scene in that movie totally emphasizes that point where he shows up at the balcony, to try and get her, you know what I mean?
Yeah. So, and the thing is, it's really unfair to sex workers, because it says, and I'm sure there's many cases where sex workers are, turn to that kind of work for the same reason somebody, goes and shows up at Home Depot to work, because they're desperate for money. It's not their first choice. But I'm sure that's not true in all cases. Yeah. So the thing is that this woman, this Julia Roberts character, she turns to sex work because she's in peril. And then this kind of white savior comes along, and this rich man comes along and rescues her. And it's kind of like saying, this is the best. You don't really have any agency. Your choices as a woman, they don't really matter. What really matters is that you have a man come rescue you. And there was like really and people are going to say, oh, you're too cynical or whatever. But like, what do these movies really say? What does a film like Pretty Woman really say? It's like, oh my God, I almost did sex work and then I was rescued. So instead now I'll whatever. But it's nice to see a film like Anora, which has similar elements, very similar elements. Except she was a sex worker, and she does fall in love with this. They do have this romantic attachment. But it's just an honest story. It's such an honest story, and it's not predictable at all. And like, how much do we love a film that's not predictable? And this film is not predictable. I think if my main criteria was craft, originality, and authenticity, this film would have all three of those. Like, it would just score at 10 in all three of those for being authentic, for being very craftily made. I mean, everybody who showed up to make this movie,
and
even shot. Well, they showed up, but even Sean Baker said that, and he was joking, but he said this film was really easy to make because I had this amazing crew and this amazing actors, and they basically made the film. So
he also, the other thing I saw, watched an interview with him last night, is that he said he likes the fact that he kind of left the ending. There is an ending to the film, but there are a few ambiguous things, like you're not sure what on a few things, and he likes that because he likes people to think about it and to draw their own, what is your opinion of this, what is your opinion of that, and I like that too in films. It's not like just black and white, cut and dried at the very end of the film. I'm talking about that last scene in the car. You know what I mean? It's
I mean, there's an ending in that the main character, the Mickey Madison character, is sent on a pretty I don't know, I don't want to give anything away, but
I wouldn't.
Her trajectory in life is completely changed at the end of the film. And in that sense, it has, what we would say, call a denouement, which means it would just have an ending, right? And it does, but it also, I think because these characters are so well brought to life, that in your mind you project them forward because you're still engaged with them as a story, which is really powerful. You don't just drop it, but
Yeah.
I mean, I am reminded of the famous Orson Welles quote, and I'm just paraphrasing, where he said, "Well, if you want your story to have a happy ending, you just have to end it before things get bad again." So that has some relevance to this. There was one other thing I wanted to bring up, which is there's a little bit of controversy about the film that I thought was worth mentioning, which is that Mickey Madison she chose not to have an intimacy coordinator on the set. There's a lot of controversy about that. Like everybody from the intimacy coordinator union or whatever it is, they're like, no, that should never happen. But it was her choice, and she didn't in any way feel exploited. She felt comfortable. Everybody on the set felt comfortable, and that's not a statement for or against having an intimacy coordinator. I think it's incredibly important. They a great many cases, people get ahead of themselves making films, and sometimes they forget about the well-being and the mental health of others. I mean, we've seen it when things go bad on a set, like with the Rust, with the Alec Baldwin film, or I think, wasn't it called Rust, where there was tragically a brilliant young cinematographer was fatally wounded accidentally. So it's important to have these. Plus I'm a member of the Directors Guild, and we were going to talk a little bit about that, but one of the roles on a film is the safety. Like that particular guild, the members of that guild are responsible for everybody's safety on the set. Like when John Landis, the director, was involved in that Twilight Zone disaster where the Vic Morrow and those, I think, 2 Vietnamese children were killed by a helicopter. He was charged with involuntary manslaughter.
Oh yeah.
The director of the film, because at the end of the day, the homicide inspectors show up and say, okay, so who asked them to get so close to that helicopter? And everybody says, oh, well, the director. And so it's like, okay, he's under arrest. So it's important to have these safeties, and that also goes for people, being a nudity and portrayals of sexuality and stuff. We want to make sure that people are safe. But it's very interesting that she chose not to have it. And, it went fine. There were no issues. So,
right.
But I think that anybody that's uncomfortable with the sex, or the fact that Mikey Madison was doing this without, the standard person on the set to monitor that activity, which turned out it's just not for you, the film.
Yeah.
If that bothers you, just go see another movie. Yeah. One last thing I want to say about Mikey Madison is I heard the director say that he wrote this script for her. I mean, he'd been thinking about this for a long time, but like he actually wrote the script not for her, but envisioning her as that character. He talked to her about the film, and she committed to the film before there was even a script. So
right.
I think that's part of why she fits so well into this film. And another thing I wanted to say about the sex is that I'm not a big fan of sex and violence, and especially if it has anything to do with kids. It's like, just you make a movie, don't kill kids, okay? Just don't have a kid die. Every time if a kid dies in a film, I'm like, there's some cases where it's pertinent. If you're doing a story about, Anne, what's her name? Oh God, Anne Frank. Yeah, if you're doing the story of Anne Frank, I mean, come on, she really died. But unless the sex or the violence or whatever is really pertinent to the story, if you couldn't tell that story without it, if the presence of it, especially sex, does something to the story other than titillate the audience, and I have to say, with all of the sex and nudity in this film, it really pulls you into the frenzy and enthusiasm of early 20-year-old kids who just want to have sex. You kind of need to viscerally feel that. And so they just put enough of that in. And I was really impressed that a film could be that explicit. but serve the story. So
yeah, I mean, I saw an interview with both of them, Sean and Mikey,
uh-huh.
and he said he put in that whole strip club scene at the very beginning, which was like 15, 20 minutes or whatever,
Yeah,
you know,
long
beginning
scene.
of the film, because he wanted to establish the character, Mikey's character,
Yeah,
Annie, Anora,
yeah,
and her world in terms of where her mindset was, in terms of how she operated, how she hustled, how she did this. So that way it propelled the next part of the story, which is really the real story, is
yeah,
the whole
yeah.
relationship with the guy.
But that whole setup in the strip club, I mean, that could have been a valid opening for like a workplace drama,
Oh yeah.
because it really got into this incredible depth and subtlety. It was really revelatory, and they did. I mean, the cinematographer did a fantastic job. The lighting on that scene was fantastic.
The next thing we're going to talk about is the Directors Guild of America theatrical feature film nominees for 2024 were just announced, and I'm just going to run through them real quick, and then we'll talk about them after
Okay.
that. And of course, we've reviewed this film, Emilia Perez, Jacques Audiard. He was nominated for Best Director. James Mangold, A Complete Unknown. We've reviewed that film about the Bob Dylan, biopic story. And then Sean Baker, who we were just talking about, he got nominated for Anora, which is the film we just reviewed. And then this next film, Conclave, that's going to be the next one I want to watch. I know you've already seen it. And Edward Berger was nominated. And then finally, Brady Corbett for The Brutalist, which you've seen and I have not seen.
Yeah.
And so that's coming up on the list as well in terms of the films that we're going to review. And so those are the nominees. And what did you think of the nominees? And I wanted to ask you how this whole Directors Guild of America awards, how does it all work, the nominating and the
Oh, okay. Well, I mean, I feel a certain degree of satisfaction because those are the films that I voted for. And the way that works is there's a nomination ballot in a bunch of different categories. I mean, everything that members of the Directors Guild work on, television,
Right.
every category, television, from sitcoms to
documentaries, whatever, right?
Yeah. News, whatever it is. And then, of course, feature films. And the way they do it is you make 5 choices and you order them 1 to 5. And so they're weighted, and that helps to determine it. But I'm not sure if I voted for A Complete Unknown. I might have had something else in there. I don't remember, but definitely. And I think and so how does it work? That's how it works. I mean, if you're a voting member in good standing in the Directors Guild, you get tons of screeners. Then they have, there's online voting and you vote. I think that award is 85 years old. And I think the Oscars is 95 years old. So that means that for 10 years, the director's branch of the Academy didn't have any guidance in who they should pick, other than, there was no precedent for it. But it's a very significant award in Hollywood, even though they don't televise it. It's the bellwether for who's going to get the Oscar. It's like, I think you could look that up, but I believe only 3 people have ever received the DGA award and not received the Oscar.
Right.
And I think that was it was Steven Spielberg. He was given the DGA award 3 times
and didn't get the Oscar.
Yeah, before they finally gave him an Oscar. So, which was a really odd thing. But everybody's kind of.
Can I ask you about that? Let me ask you that.
Sure.
So the Directors Guild members vote for, like, now that's 5 nominees or whatever. So now you'll vote in terms of which of these 5 you think is the best, or is that?
And it'll be announced. Yes. Yeah, that's right.
And then they have an event where they announce it and all that. So
they have a big dinner. They have a big go ahead, sorry.
No, I was going to say, so what's the difference between the voters for the DGA versus the voters for the Director Oscar? Are there more people involved in the Director Oscar in the Oscars in the Academy, or no?
I don't really know. I think not all directors. I'm not a member of the Academy, but I vote for the DGA. So,
well, how about this? Television directors can vote for the DGAs, right? Even though they're not feature film directors, they can still.
Oh yeah, I vote for television.
Right, exactly. So I would think maybe the Oscars, they don't have necessarily television directors in there, for instance. You know what I mean?
Members of the Academy, maybe.
Yeah.
I don't know, but it's essentially the same group of people. In other words, the
Okay.
directors branch in the Academy is made up of people that are all members of the Directors Guild. There may be more of them in the Academy, more of them DGA. I don't know. I've never really checked that out. I just, so there'll be a ballot. I think I got it. There'll be a ballot where it's just the 5 films, and then you vote for the one you want, and it'll be announced before the Oscars, obviously, because people need to handicap the Oscars, and so that's one of the ways they do it.
Okay, and now let me ask you this: do you mind telling me who you think should win of these DGA awards? Which one would use your personal number one?
The Brutalist.
Brady Corbett, the Brutalist.
Yeah.
Okay.
It's just like I said it before. It's a long, beautiful film, 3.5 hours with an intermission. Nobody knows anything about brutalist architecture. Nobody knows anything about the mid-century architect Laszlo Toth, who the film is about. But it's such an amazing film about human artistic expression and human experience. It's just like it's just an art house film that I think is going to go mainstream. Plus, anyway, it's even like you can even see a little bit of it in this poster. Like I said this before, everybody who worked on this film, all the major departments, the production designer, art director, the cinematographer, the composer, they all sort of, at least it seemed to me, they all sort of studied the essence of this aesthetic referred to as brutalism. And they expressed it in their work. I mean, even to me, you look at the poster, the way the graphics are done, it's in that style. Like, it's not your typical movie poster with Trajan as a font, which is like the movie poster font. I think more movies use the font Trajan than any other font. It's just crazy. But you look at it, it's kind of very stark, and it just has a few elements, and everything is really angular. And the B is like, it's a kind of a fuck you B, going to punch you in the face. Or I'll say that again. But anyway, all of these, even the poster, if you look at it with all of its sparseness and angularity, to me, it expresses, it very much expresses the brutalist aesthetic. And for me as an artist, that was quite special to see so many different people genuinely expressing this aesthetic. So,
well, let me tell you briefly my thoughts on this, because I have not seen the movie yet.
Yeah.
But I got to tell you, based on our previous lifetime, you know what I mean? When I saw The Brutalist, I had a misunderstood. I didn't know what the heck that meant until the last time we did a show, and you told me it's a type of architecture, or it's an artistic expression. So I had to look it up after the show, because when you hear brutalist, you think, oh, this is going to be brutal. They're going to be tearing people apart. And I mean, that's the common thing that you would think. So I had a little aversion to the title, right? So I'll tell you though, a quick funny story is I'll never forget when the Shawshank Redemption came out in the early 90s, right? I had one of my friends tell me, oh, you've got to go see this movie. It's fantastic, this and that. And I went, I don't like prison movies. That was my thing. I told her, I said, I'm not really big on prison movies. I don't want to see it. Oh, no, you got to go see the Shawshank. I waited 6 months, and then I went and saw the Shawshank Redemption. And I went, you should have told me it was so good, because it became my favorite movie of all time. So it's just funny how just different ideas based off the type of story or the title can turn you off to something rather than be open to it and actually experience it. So now I'm looking forward to watching The Brutalist.
Yeah, it's a really, really interesting film. Even if it's not your favorite film of the year, you're definitely, it's very educational. There's you could literally teach a class at a university in mid-century architecture, and you could kind of use that film as a sort of a focal point for the whole. So it's really a good film, but it's not an academic film. It's a highly emotional film. And I'm pretty sure Adrian Brody is at least going to get nominated. I predict he's going to win an Oscar, and I also think Guy Pearce is going to get nominated for Best Supporting Actor and probably win an Oscar, because this is the best thing he's done since Memento. I mean, he's done some good films,
Yeah.
but Guy Pearce is just scary good in this film. It's pretty amazing.
All right, so we're just going to move on, and before we end off the show, we're
Sure.
going to tell you some things that we're watching on streaming services right now that you can watch right now. This is one of my favorites right now, Landman with Billy Bob Thornton. It's on Paramount Plus, and they just finished the season. There's 10 episodes, the first season. It's fantastic, and I know I put it out on Facebook, and other people are all raving about it. Billy Bob's performance is amazing. A landman, just so people know, it's an actual true position in an oil company. He's out running the oil fields in Texas for whatever oil company that they're working for, and it's called a landman. And this is written and produced and directed by Taylor Sheridan, the guy who does Yellowstone and all that sort of series. And it's a fantastic show. So anybody, I highly recommend, if you get a chance to see Landman, it's well worth your time. And then the other one I wanted to mention is one that you're watching, which I have not started yet, but I'm going to, and that's American Primeval. Right. And why don't you tell everybody a little bit about that? And that's on Netflix right now.
Yeah, it's quite good. It's a limited series, and that happens to be like my favorite format for television is the limited series.
Yeah.
I don't like a cliffhanger and then like 2 years later they pick it up again. And plus, to me, what's that?
Me neither. I don't either.
Yeah, and you know, it's like what do you got? 6 episodes or about an hour each, so you're looking at around a 6-hour film.
Yeah.
And I just the way that you structure a story over 6 hours as a complete story, it's different. You know, some of my favorite limited series, like if anybody saw the Lost Flowers of what was her name? Something Hart. The Sigourney Weaver. It was on Amazon Prime. Alice Hart, the Lost Flowers of Alice Hart. Oh my God, one of the best things ever on television. I think it was a 6-part based on a book. It's just absolutely spectacular. It's a story about abuse and multi-generational family abuse, and it's a story about nature and what heals us. It's a story about the stories we tell about ourselves so that we can survive. It's an Australian production. Sigourney Weaver stars. She is not really the lead, but she's one of the stars. She also produced it. And you know, when I watched it, excuse me for going on a tangent, but I remembered, oh yeah, this is why Sigourney Weaver is on the list of 100 greatest actors of all times, because she really is. So, but anyway, that's I love a limited series. I'll generally give them a chance. I really liked this cast. I thought the cast in this film was amazing. I started to watch it. I was hugely disappointed. I thought it was kind of, what's the word, self-indulgent, and it was kind of, I didn't like the grade. I didn't like the color correction. I didn't like the way it was shot. I didn't like the way it was edited. And then into the second episode, the whole thing started to make sense. And the whole thing started to come into focus. It was like, you ever meet somebody, you just didn't like them, and then they ended up being your best friend?
Oh, yeah.
Well, the American Primeval is a little like that. It's an amazing story. It reminds me of one of these Louis what's his name?
Louis L'Amour.
Yeah, Louis L'Amour stories, which are like this violent West, where you know the bad guys are always Mormons, right? And you know so naturally, so in this film, the film features, this is 1850, and the film features what was known as the Mormon militia, and I was so myself happy to see this focused on, having my own long experience with the cult, regrettable experience. And I know a lot of Mormons. My former wife was from a family of Scientologists and Mormons. So I had a lot of exposure to Mormonism. I know a lot of terrific people. But, you know, it is a cult, and they have a really dark past. A lot of people don't know that in 1850, the Mormon militia was the largest standing army in the United States. This is one of the reasons why the U.S. government in some of the territories had give and shoot on sight orders for Mormons. They did some horrific things. They trafficked people just like Scientology from Europe. They drove them across the plains, across the wilderness. They drove them to Salt Lake City. A lot of them died. It was a forced march. It's went out in history as the Great Mormon Handcart Tragedy. You can read about that. You can Google it on YouTube. You can find documentaries about it. So I was like, yeah, like, let's talk about these people because, they basically did in Salt Lake City with David Miscavige. I know we don't do Scientology, but he's very much trying to do the same thing in Clearwater. So I was kind of happy to see the Mormon past become, not that I'm down on Mormonism or whatever, I'm down on abuse if anybody is being abused, but I think these things need to be part of the conversation. And so in addition to this being a very violent, and it's intended to be because it's about a violent time, and I also thought the Indians were going to get short shrift, but they don't. The treatment, the way they showed the Shoshone Indians was absolutely amazing. How spiritual these people were and how much they were screwed over, especially by the Mormons. I mean, the Mormons committed a genocide of Indians in the West. And the ones that they didn't kill, they just adopted the children and just wiped out their culture. So this film has a lot going for it. Taylor Kitsch is amazing, as is the woman. I can't think of her name right now. And then there's a couple of other actors. I don't have a list in front of me, people that I really like. So yeah, I can't say enough about it. So
yeah, I'm looking forward to watching it. I'm just
I highly recommend it.
Yeah. Okay, great. American Primeval. I know what you mean though, but I like a limited series too, because then you got a beginning, a middle, and an end. Not like, oh yeah, well now we got to continue it for 3 more seasons.
Yeah, I mean
they lose their way after a while.
Yeah, sometimes they do. I mean, I remember Penny Dreadful when it was on Showtime, one of the best series ever. And the guy, what was his name, Logan, the guy who developed it and wrote it, it got canceled after 3 seasons because only 800,000 people turned in for the season finale. And, I thought it was one of the best things on TV, and then it gets canceled. And then the creator came out and said, look, I only created this for 3 seasons, so I don't really care. But see, that's the thing. They get a bunch of viewership, and then they're like, we got to keep the story going. Where, it's like a limited series. It's like a big book. You have small books and big books. And it's structured differently than, somebody writes a science fiction book and it's a huge hit, so they decide to make it into a series. So they write another one and another one, and they're just sort of, like Marvel movies. They're just mining, a franchise, right? Season after season. So I really like it. I mean, another Western, which is a limited series, which I loved, which is called Godless. I forget the guy's name who created it. Same guy who did The Queen's Gambit, which is another limited series. And I really enjoy those a lot. So
yeah. Okay, great.
So if I can remember, I'll put these, all of this stuff, I'll put it in the show notes, especially The Lost Flowers of Alice Hart, which I cannot, Jesus, just stock up on Kleenex. And
I haven't seen it. So
it's amazing.
On my list.
And it's so beautiful. It's like the beauty is it's a treat.
Well, please subscribe to our channel. Las Vegas Travel and More is my channel. And then, of course, subscribe to Mitch's channel, which is Scientology-the-big-lie. And then the other thing I wanted to mention, too, is you can order Mitch's book, Scientology, The Big Lie, on Amazon and on his website and all the different places. And it's a fantastic book, a great read. If you haven't read it already, definitely get it. It's really well worth it.
Thanks, Mark. Yeah, I should also mention I've been reading, for some months now, I've been reading chapters of it live on YouTube, and so I'm trying to get the chapters knocked out one a day. So, because it's if you want to tune in and watch that, I'll read the book and I give a lot of background data, other information that was going on. So
yeah, and that's on Mitch's channel, Scientology, The Big Lie. So anyway. You can
so go on over there, hit the notification bell, and then you'll know when I'm doing this. And then if you like the content, subscribe and give it a like, as they say.
And then also, if you have questions or comments or opinions about what we talked about on Anora, the DGA Awards, LANDMAN, any of the things we've talked about, please put them down there. If you have suggestions for the show or things you want us to review, let us know down in the comments. We really appreciate the feedback. And then if you'd like to support our channel, you can go down to Buy Me a Coffee in the video description. Any money that comes in, it helps support the channel. We get to go see more movies and do all sorts of things. So we really appreciate the support from everyone there. Mitch, have you got anything else you'd like to say before we end off this edition of Mitch and Mark at the Movies?
No, I think that's pretty much it. So yeah,
I'm
anyway,
looking forward to it. You know, we'll do Conclave and the Brutalists, and then of course we got the Oscar nominations will be out by the time people see this, so we'll be able to comment on those as well.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm a little behind on watching foreign films and documentaries. I need to catch up on that. So
Okay.
yeah.
All right. Until next time, everybody. Bye bye.